The forged signatures are already on the documents. Nia Caldwell is in Seoul, under a false name. She is a Black international financial crime attorney, and her real name is being used to destroy her. Someone has forged port authorizations inside Hanul Maritime. Someone has framed her, and her family's shipping company is days away from a forced takeover. The trail leads her into a Hanul board session she was never meant to attend. She is not there as herself. He is already in the room. Han Jun-ho, 6 feet tall, long black hair in a loose knot. A crane tattooed in single brushstrokes from his left shoulder up the side of his neck. They call him the Silent Crane. He watches everything. He says almost nothing, and when Nia moves to leave, he already knows her real name. He proposes a contract marriage, mutual legal protection. Nia reads the document. Then she rewrites it. 5 clauses. The last one is absolute. No physical contact. He signs every line. For 3 months, he keeps every word. He knocks before entering any room. He places things on the table rather than handing them directly to her. At public events, when photographers ask them to move closer, he says, "My wife decides the distance." What neither of them prepared for was the moment the contract would not be enough. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The forged authorization stamps were identical in every way except one, the ink. Nia had been staring at the same 3 documents for 40 minutes in a rented Mapo-gu office, the kind of anonymous glass box where she could work without anyone asking her name. The name she'd given the building manager was Park Ji-yeon. The name on her actual bar license, the one currently being dragged through 2 civil proceedings in New York, was Caldwell. That name had become a liability. She photographed the documents, zoomed in on the serial numbers embedded in the corner of each Hanul port authorization. The ink absorbed light differently. Not enough to matter to a customs agent running a scan, but enough to matter in court. Enough to matter to the attorney who already knew the stamps had been made in a print shop in Incheon, not in any government office. Her phone buzzed. She already knew what it was. Her managing partner's message was 4 lines. The arbitration date had been moved up. Julian Mercer's legal team had filed a new motion claiming she'd forged her own bar credentials to gain access to the Caldwell Maritime Board records. The motion was absurd. It was also going to take 3 months to disprove, and Caldwell Maritime had 3 weeks before the acquisition vote. Nia set the phone face down. Her father had built that company from 2 leased cargo ships and a shipping route nobody else wanted. He died before he understood what Julian was doing with it. She was not going to let the same man who had used her father's trust dismantle everything her father had built. She turned back to the documents. The stamps carried a batch number, and every batch number traced to a source. She wrote it down in the small leather notebook she kept in her blazer's interior pocket, closed it, and began packing. The Hanul Logistics Board session was scheduled for 9:15. She knew because she'd spent 11 days arranging to know. The contact inside was a paralegal named Lim, who moved between 3 law firms and owed Nia a favor she had never collected. The favor bought her a guest credential and a slot on the visitor roster under Park Ji-yeon, consultant, retained by an unnamed partner firm. It was thin. It was enough. She arrived early, took a seat near the back of the conference anteroom, and spread open a folder of documents she had no use for. Around her, assistants arranged water pitchers and exchanged low comments in Korean. Dia followed every word. She let nothing cross her face. Han Jun-ho walked in at 9:11. She had reviewed photographs, public filings, 2 profiles, and a deposition transcript. None of it accounted for the way the room recalibrated when he entered. Not because he demanded anything, but because he required nothing. He moved to the head of the table without looking at who was watching. His dark hair was pulled back in a low knot. The crane tattoo climbed from his collar toward his jaw in single brushstroke lines. He set a folder down and sat. So-yeon took the chair to his left. Park Min-kyu positioned himself near the door. The session began without ceremony. Nia stayed for 40 minutes. She documented 6 references to the port authorizations, 2 to a subsidiary outside her prior research, and 1 oblique mention of a third-party audit that Se-yeon shut down with a look before the speaker finished his sentence. Then Junho said her name, not Park Ji-yeon, her name, Miss Caldwell. The room held still. He said it the way he'd said everything else, level, unhurried, as though it were information placed on the table rather than a trap. You've been reviewing our port documentation for 11 days. He turned a single page. You traced the batch numbers to Inchan. You haven't filed anything. Nia closed her folder. Not yet. Which means you want something besides evidence. She looked at him steadily. I want Julian Mercer prosecuted. A moment passed. No one at the table moved. So do I, he said. The conversation that followed happened in a smaller room, with only Se-yeon present, and the door closed. Junho laid out what he knew in the same efficient register he'd used in the board session. Mercer had embedded himself in Hanul's financial infrastructure through a charitable foundation built to launder transnational funds. The foundation's legal architecture bore marks consistent with Caldwell Maritime's international contract templates, work product that could only have originated from inside Caldwell's own counsel. Which means someone used my firm's work against my family's company, Nia said. And against mine. He turned the folder toward her. I need a legal presence Mercer cannot predict. Someone outside the organization. Someone he's already dismissed. She read the proposal in under 2 minutes. It was precise and deliberately incomplete. A temporary contract marriage, framed as a corporate alliance, documented under Korean family law. The arrangement would grant her access to Hanul's internal records and give him a legal liaison with international standing. No, she said. The access would... I heard the access. She uncapped her pen. The contract needs 5 clauses. So-yeon's expression shifted toward something between wariness and professional regard. Junho waited. Nia wrote them out. Audit rights over specified Hanul accounts, co-counsel status on all Mercer-adjacent filings, separate residence, full termination authority at her sole discretion, and, last, a no physical contact clause, binding on both parties for the duration of the agreement. She slid it across the table. He read each clause without comment, lifted his pen, and signed at the bottom without asking her to remove a single line. Nia studied the signature. Then she looked up. When do we start? She said. The apartment Junho assigned her occupied the east wing of the Hanul residence, separate entrance, separate key, a deadbolt that answered only to her. He sent his housekeeper with the keys and a folded card that read only, "The gate code is yours to change." She changed it that evening. The first week she half expected a test. A door opened without warning, some pretext for closeness. She stayed alert the way she had learned to stay alert, cataloging exits, tracking movement by sound. He knocked, every time. 3 deliberate knocks, then silence while he waited. She noticed on day 3, filed it away, kept watching. By the second week the pattern held. Files appeared on her desk. Hanul port records, authorization chains, Julian's financial routing through 3 shell companies. Left at the corner of the table as though placed by accident, never handed directly. She found them after he left the room. No fanfare, no reminder of the source. She pulled the first bundle apart at 2 in the morning, cross-checking ledger entries against the maritime registry she had photographed in Rotterdam. 3 authorization codes matched. Julian's name appeared nowhere. His money moved like smoke through ventilation she could not yet map. But the shape of it was beginning to clarify. The shape of Junho was also clarifying. At the first public event, a Haniel donor's reception at the Four Seasons, he arrived at her door at 7:45. When she opened it, he stepped back one pace, giving her the hallway. They walked to the car without touching. In the ballroom, he positioned himself to her left, close enough that no one would read distance between them, far enough that their arms stayed clear. A photographer from Seoul Economy Weekly asked them to step together for the lens. Junho looked at the camera. "My wife decides the distance," he said, flat, without explanation. The photographer adjusted his angle. Nia decided nothing. She stayed exactly where she stood. That was the decision. A month in, she walked into his study to return a contract she had annotated. The marriage agreement lay open on the corner of his desk, face up, not left for her, just there, open to the fifth clause, the one that let her leave with 48 hours notice and no claim on Haniel assets. She set her document beside it and left without a word. Neither mentioned it afterward. The agreement stayed on his desk the entire time, open to the same page. She had spent 8 years inside Julian's language, where every gesture was leverage, every tenderness a debt she would eventually pay. Junho's language carried no IOUs. She was still learning to read a syntax without hidden cost. The Hanol Palace Hotel Charity Gala fell on a Tuesday in March. Black tie, 200 guests, a string quartet near the East Terrace. Nia wore structured midnight silk and let the braids fall loose, the gold chain catching light at her collarbone. Junho waited in the foyer without looking at his watch. When she came down the stairs, he said, "You're ready." Not a compliment, a fact. 40 minutes in, the room shifted. She felt it before she saw it, a current of attention moving from the entrance inward, too deliberate for an ordinary arrival. Then she recognized the sandy hair, the dove-gray suit, the way Julian Mercer crossed a room as if the architecture existed to frame him. 2 attorneys flanked him, 3 journalists clustered just behind, and a man in a consulate badge walked at Julian's right shoulder. Julian stopped 12 feet away. The quartet kept playing. Nia. His voice carried the rehearsed warmth of a man who had practiced this moment for weeks. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He laid the documents on the nearest table, thick, tabbed, notarized. He spoke loudly enough for the ring of guests who had stopped moving to hear every word. The judge's signature on her divorce decree, he said, had been fraudulent. The marriage invalid, which meant the marriage to Junho was invalid, which meant she was, legally, still his. "You've made your point." He crossed the remaining distance and closed his hand around her arm. "Let's go home." Every conversation nearby went silent. Junho stepped between them in a single move. His hands stayed at his sides. He looked at her, only at her, and said, "Tell me what you want to happen." No claim, no rescue, just a question that left the answer entirely where it belonged. Nia looked at Julian's grip. She removed her arm herself, the way you remove something that has already stopped belonging to you. She looked at Junho. "I want to stay beside you." He extended his hand. She took it. He drew her close, one slow, deliberate motion, and rested his hand at her waist. The first time in 3 months. She felt the weight of it with the same precision she had felt every time he had knocked. He turned to face Julian. The quartet faded somewhere behind the silence between the 2 men. "You didn't come to reclaim a wife," Junho said. "You came to recover something you never managed to own." Julian's composure held 3 seconds longer than it should have. Then one of his attorneys touched his sleeve, and Julian understood what the touch meant. The room had already decided. He left the way men like him always left a loss, chin raised, eyes fixed somewhere distant, pretending the exit had been planned. Nia kept Junho's hand. Inside the documents Julian had abandoned at the edge of the ballroom, There was a name, a notary, a judge, a chain of signatures she had not yet traced. She had months of evidence. One more thread to pull. And now Julian knew she was pulling it. The file arrived at 2:47 a.m. A single folder, no sender name, routed through the Haniel server, using her own access credentials. Nia opened it at the kitchen counter, glass of water untouched beside her laptop. Inside, her full legal name on the tab, not the version she had been using since arriving in Seoul. She clicked. 43 pages. Surveillance logs dated 8 months before the board session, where she had first entered Haniel's conference room. Her flight manifest from Lagos to Seoul, annotated in 2 languages. Her father's debt to Caldwell Maritime's creditors, cross-referenced against Julian's acquisition timeline with the precision of a prosecutor's brief. A photograph taken outside her apartment building in New York. Autumn light, her coat not yet buttoned, captioned with her Monday morning schedule to the minute. Her hands stopped on the trackpad. She had been careful. She had been meticulous. She had arrived in Seoul believing she held the thread no one else could see, had built her position inside this arrangement like a case. Slow, documented, airtight. He had been watching her build the spool. She closed the laptop before the last page loaded, not because she couldn't read it, because she already understood the full geometry of what she was looking at, and she needed to be standing up when she did something about it. She dressed in 20 minutes. Flat leather boots, coat, the folder printed at the lobby business center and tucked under her arm. The elevator to the executive floor moved in silence. Outside, the city was still dark, orange veins of highway threading the gray. Park Min-kyu stood outside the penthouse door. He stepped aside without a word. Her clearance was permanent, built into the arrangement's first clause, and she walked in without knocking. Junho was already awake. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, with his back to her, a glass of water in one hand. He turned when he heard her cross the room. He looked at the folder under her arm and did not speak. She set the printed pages on the table between them. 8 months before we met, she said. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. He reached for nothing. Yes. Did you know about my father before the board session? Yes. She let the confirmation settle. Did you engineer the timing? He held her gaze. The timing was yours. The opportunity was mine. She had built 3 months of evidence inside this marriage. She had watched him honor every clause, every line she had drawn, until trusting him felt like something earned through methodology, not something being managed. She turned the pages to the photograph. New York. Autumn light, her coat unbuttoned. My father's debt, my investigation, my schedule. All of it, he said, before you stepped into that boardroom. She closed the folder. You proposed a contract. You let me rewrite every clause. You signed every boundary I put in that document, and you were holding 43 pages on my life when you did it. He said nothing. That silence was its own testimony. You respected the distance between our bodies while investigating every part of my life. He set the glass down. There's no version of what I did that's clean. The space between them held, not the warmth that had accumulated over 3 months, but something stripped bare, precise as a court exhibit. She had felt this arrangement shift before. The gala, his hand at her waist, her choice. This shift was different. This one removed the foundation. He crossed to the desk. He opened the lower drawer and placed 4 items on the table in sequence. A sealed drive, a bound portfolio, a flash drive with an orange cap, a single folded document. Drive contains the complete file, he said. Everything. Nothing removed. He touched the portfolio. Your shares. Transferred to your direct control this morning. He touched the orange drive. My uncle. Accounts. Falsified manifests. Transfers traceable to Han Sung-tae's personal authorization. My federal-grade evidence. He rested his hand on the document last. Dissolution papers. My signature, notarized, dated today. The marriage ends the moment you file. Nia looked at the 4 items. Her eyes moved across them the way they moved across evidence. No hurry, no flinch. You'd be clear of this before Julian's press conference, he said. She picked up the orange drive. She picked up the dissolution papers. He watched her. No move toward her. No interference. Nia. His voice, quieter. She kept her eyes on the drive. I would have told you, he said, when it was over. She met his gaze then, just once, the full weight of it landing between them. When you decided it was over. Yes. You put a door in this contract, he said. I never had the right to lock it. She folded the papers into her coat pocket without looking at him again. She left the portfolio on the table. The shares could wait. She was not giving this moment another minute. She was at the door when he said her name. Once. No follow-up sentence. She did not turn around. The elevator descended 42 floors. She watched the numbers drop and forced herself to think in sequence rather than in feeling. Feeling was for later, for a locked hotel room, for some other city. Right now, what Julian had scheduled, what the orange drive contained, what she could build in the 11 hours before a press conference turned her father's name into a fraud case study on every financial desk in Asia. The lobby doors opened onto cold pavement and an empty street. No car waited at the curb, no footsteps followed behind her. Her phone showed nothing. She stood there with the dissolution papers in her coat pocket and evidence in her fist, and the city moved around her the way cities move, indifferent, continuous, full of people who did not know her name. She had trusted methodically, built it the way she built cases, piece by piece, nothing assumed, and it had rested on a foundation someone else had poured before she ever arrived. She started walking. Julian's press conference was in 11 hours. He had her name in a prepared statement, her father's forged signature on a document that would reach financial desks across 2 continents by midday. She had a drive, dissolution papers, and no partner left in this city. She had worked with less. But she had never worked alone in a place where the one person who might have helped her had just handed her the exit and stood in silence while she took it. 11 hours. One recorded confession she still needed to get. And Julian, somewhere in this city, certain she had finally run out of moves. She called Julian at 11 that night. Not a message, a voice call, direct, unhesitating. She told him she wanted to meet before the press conference. Alone, no lawyers. He said yes before she finished the sentence. The hotel suite Julian chose was immaculate, 20 floors above the city. He was already pouring wine when she walked in. He smiled the way he always did when he believed he had won. Nia set her bag on the table. She did not touch the wine. You look tired, he said. Tell me why you did it, she said. Julian's smile held. He thought she meant the marriage, the documents, the filing, the legal angle. He sat across from her and began talking. That was the first mistake. She guided him with pauses, not questions, a slight tilt of her head when he hedged, silence when he reached the edge of something he hadn't meant to say. He filled every silence, the way men who are certain of their audience always do. The divorce papers, he admitted, had never been properly filed. He had people. Digital records were not as permanent as they looked. And the foundation accounts? She asked. He was comfortable now. He explained the structure. Caldwell Maritime had been elegant, untraceable, the best conduit he'd ever used. He was almost proud. Han Sung Tae, she said, only the name. Julian set his glass down. Old business, he said, before you. And my father? The room held. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said it was an accident they had arranged to look like negligence. He offered no apology. He explained it as strategy, clean, necessary. He said it like a business decision already filed away. Nia's hands lay still. Her face stayed closed. The recording device in her bag had been running for 41 minutes. When Julian stood and reached for her arm, not asking, taking, she pressed 2 fingers to her collarbone. The door opened. Junho stepped through first, Park Min-kyu 2 steps behind. Julian measured the distance to the side exit and found it already occupied by 2 men he didn't recognize. He looked at Junho. Junho looked back. No one spoke. No words were needed. He turned back to Nia. "You won't walk away from this clean," he said. "I'm not walking away," she said. "I'm handing you in." Prosecutor Kim Hae-jin entered with 4 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. She was already gloved. She extended her hand to Nia without acknowledging Julian. Nia placed the recording device in her palm, then the printed file, 63 pages, the complete network structure, notarized. He was escorted out through the lobby he had booked for his own cameras. Every lens aimed at Nia's disgrace caught his arrest instead. The statement he had prepared to deliver from the podium was still folded in his breast pocket when they put him in the car. He had lost more than he'd planned to keep. Junho had given prosecutors access to records that reached his own uncle's legacy, years of protected silence, now entered as evidence. The organization fractured along the exact line he had drawn. He had chosen the fracture himself. Han Sung-tae was arrested in Busan at 4 a.m, mid-flight. Caldwell Maritime's accounts were unfrozen before the week ended. The legal reinstatement of its shareholder structure took 11 days. On the 12th, Nia signed the documents in a Seoul attorney's office and took the first flight to New York. Junho stayed away from the airport. He sent the dissolution papers by courier, already signed, a week before the contract period closed. No note, no request. The papers were folded exactly as they had come in the original envelope. She was gone 6 weeks. When she walked into the Hanul Logistics boardroom unannounced, the assistants looked at each other and said nothing. Junho was mid-sentence when he stopped. Nia was sitting in his chair. The old contract lay open in her hands. She turned one page, then another, as if reviewing a clause she had almost forgotten to close. She looked up. "Did you really never intend to break this rule?" She pressed one finger to clause 3. He crossed the room. He stood at the far edge of the table, the length of the contract between them. A rule only protects someone when it still holds in the moments you most want to break it. She held his gaze. Then she picked up his pen and crossed the clause out with one line. He remained where he was. She stood and reached toward him, her palm against his jaw. He went very still. "Now you can ask," she said. He asked if he could kiss her. She answered without a contract. Months later, the Caldwell-Hanul Maritime International Board convened its first joint session in Geneva. 2 chairs had been added to the head of the table, one for each name on the door. The agenda led with the Pacific routing restructure, 3 years of Nia's work, now bearing both names. Before they entered the room, Junho offered his hand. She took it. Not because the ground was uncertain, not because she needed steadying. She took his hand because she had decided to, without precedent and without conditions, and there was no clause in the world that covered a choice made entirely free. She walked in first. She spoke first. The room listened. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever had to write your own terms just to feel safe enough to stay? And have you ever learned to trust someone, not by what they promised, but by what they never took from you, not even when they could have? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about autonomy, trust, and justice, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.